Nuclear war, the how and the why. So today what we want to do is talk about nuclear war versus conventional war and some of the misconceptions that's being passed around on social media and in the mass media. Now, the main difference between how a nuclear war and a conventional war is fought is the distribution of forces. In conventional war, you bring your forces together to attack so that you outnumber the enemy in a mass manner. In a nuclear war, you disperse forces. The important thing to understand about dispersal is nobody wants to waste a nuke on a few people. So if the United States and Russia and China think a nuclear war is coming, and NATO thinks a nuclear war is coming, they will disperse their forces. This includes the ground forces, the air forces, the naval forces, and the strategic nuclear forces. You can see how Russia has put their mobile missile forces on the road and they're moving them around. Also, nuclear submarines are dispersing. If you look at the Ukraine and what's going on there may be an explanation on why the Russians are using a force of such a small size compared to the military objectives. The Russians, if they're using Ukraine as a manipulation in preparation for World War III and nuclear war, that would explain why they're using a small force. We're receiving almost no information on how the conventional military forces of Russia are being dispersed or not dispersed. Because when you think about it, you need a large amount of manpower and material or a very high priority target in order to use a nuclear weapon. You're not going to use a nuclear weapon to wipe out 200 men. So a tactical nuclear round would be focused on battalion and division level assets. So in this case, what we're seeing is distribution of forces. If NATO is concentrating forces in these exercises, that may make them vulnerable to a Russian nuclear attack. That actually gives them a nice target that could be covered with a tactical weapon. So let's say you're bringing 2 or 3 divisions together in a 20-mile radius. You could use several tactical weapons and wipe all those assets out. Now, as far as nuclear targets go, there's a lot of misconceptions that people are saying cities won't be targeted. In a roundabout way, that may be true, but in an actual fashion, it's not true. The reason is your transportation targets, your communication targets, your transportation nodes, your manufacturing, and most of your military bases are actually at or on the outskirts of cities. For instance, in North Carolina, most of the military bases in North Carolina and Virginia are actually in cities. So as a consequence of hitting these military bases, the cities would be wiped out also. So it's a misconception to tell people that cities are not being deliberately targeted, because they are in a collateral fashion. The next thing we want to talk about is how a nuclear war would be fought. Everybody talks about everything coming down in an hour. This is not factual. Now, you can disable the enemy in an hour, but you would not have all of the weapons fall in an hour. You would have waves. And this gives you the opportunity to engage targets where the nuclear weapons are not so close together that they destroy each other. So for instance, we have what's called fratricide. So if you have a city, you have to have some distribution of weapons to cover that city, and they can't come down all at the same time because the electromagnetic pulse, the heat, the shock waves could destroy the other weapons before they detonated. So in an artillery sense, you have a methodology that's called TOT, or time on target. With conventional and bombers, you can schedule your fires so they all impact at one point in time, and this prevents the enemy from taking cover. The way it works is if you fire a sighter shot or your closest artillery fires first, when it impacts, the enemy can take cover. The reason time on target does not apply to nuclear weapons is you lose your advantage. So if everything was fired so it would impact at the same time, that would give you 30 or 40 minutes of warning. So the first salvo would come off of man-pack weapons and submarine launch weapons and hypersonics. That way you'd have less than 5 minutes of warning. When I worked at Fort Bragg, I used to go in through the main gate, and there was a convenience store there that I would stop at sometimes. And I got to thinking one day, you don't have to really even be in the base. You could have a man pack, and the person would be sitting at that convenience store and set it off, and it would wipe out part of the base. So as you can see, if you want to have no early warning for the enemy, then what you would do is utilize those fast strike weapons in the 5-minute arena. Then your ICBMs and your aircraft launch weapons would come next. So just a few thoughts and ramblings and clarifying a few things that you see that are misconceptions. Please comment. We'll see you on the next video.